Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bald Explorer Live, reading the penultimate episode of English Journey by J.B. Priestley. I think I'm on time. Good morning to Philip and Audrey and Fiona and Lisa and Michael and anybody else coming along. Slightly waylaid, a little bit this morning. There have been minor changes to the way YouTube do their going live in their new studio, which took me just a little bit of investigation, a few little minor things. Good morning to Ringer Ollie, how are you? And Graham Roffey. And also, whilst I was setting up, I did have I noticed, of course, yesterday when I was doing my Vogue show, I'd made reference to the Will Hay films, and there was a very seductive link to one of them, and I was just casually sorting out stuff here and glancing over at a Will Hay film that was going on from 1936, Where There's a Will, and the dialogue is just to die for. The dialogue is just so funny. I can't even do it justice, but there are just some lovely little jokes in there that's hilarious. Anyway, sorry, I just get myself... I've got to sit down and watch one of those films. I should just be hooting in laughter, but the weather is not conducive to sitting in watching videos. I'm not very good when it is sunny. I'm not very good when it's sunny doing anything other than getting out. I'm a bit of a sun person. I've certainly got a tan on my head and probably my hands and a bit on the forearms, I dare say, from in between the editing and stuff, sitting outside reading, or, of course, going out either on my bike or walking in this incredible, glorious weather. It's just so lovely. It almost makes me not want to get out of lockdown. It's just, there's that excuse. Although not that I don't do anything, you understand, but it's just so lovely. However, I'm busy, so I'm always busy. I wish I wasn't so busy. Not that I don't want to be making the stuff. I just wish it wasn't in me to be busy. Anyway, thank you very much for coming along. A little bit of nonsense there to start the show. We have, in our little journey, we're on chapter 15. 2 to go. And not many pages to it. But I still feel that it might be too... tomorrow we'll probably end it. We'll end it all. I'm just going to clean my glasses because they are a little bit filthy. I hope you don't mind. And blow my hooter. At least you tan, says Rami. Yeah, no, I do. I tan very easily. I've done that the wrong way round, haven't I? I've blown my nose. Now I want to use the hanky to clean my glasses, which is now not going to clean my glasses. So I'll have to use my little sweatshirt thing. Oh, I've been productive this morning. I have washed towels and bath mats. They are hanging up in the kitchen. I ought to get them outside, really, but I don't have a washing line at the moment. Good morning to Mike Brack, and to Sarah, good morning. To the very lovely Candice, good morning. The very lovely, not just lovely, but very lovely. And the weather here is supposed to be 90 degrees here on Friday. Where are you, Rita? That it's going to be 90 degrees. I assume that's Fahrenheit, not centigrade. Can you imagine if it was centigrade? Slightly boiling there. Oh, you're in Los Angeles, you did say. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I missed that, didn't I? Silly man. Sorry. Yeah, you probably typed it now, and I've just mentioned it, and we both feel silly. Well, I feel silly. Anyway. Ben Reeve, good morning. Yes, there you go. I knew that was going to happen. It's because of the delay, you see. I knew that was going to happen. Oh, dear, oh, dear. Right, let's hope I can read this in fine fettle this morning. I seem to have cut myself at the back here, shaving, in the bath. What do you do in the bath? Little quote there from Lemon Jelly. Good morning, Keith Taylor. Good morning from Keith and Helen. Lovely to catch you. listening. I think you were listening to the Carpenters today, were you not? How do I know that? Anyway, only yesterday I was thinking. My mum used to listen to the Carpenters, actually. Only yesterday when... Anyway, let's not get into the singing mode. I'm still reeling from laughter from watching a bit of Will Hay. We are with J.B. Priestley on chapter 5, the end of the book, and the chapter is called To the End, and we will do our little bit of reading and a little bit of chat about it and see where we go. Don't need that. Thank you very much. So the last we had of him was in Norwich, and he was very excited about being in Norwich. Let's hope he is excited about leaving. It is no use pretending that there is not a good fat slice of England between Norwich and Old Highgate village in the borough of St. Pancras. Presumably that's where he lives. 100 miles of solid England lies between the two. There are several counties. There are towns. Whichever route you try, plenty of towns, all ancient and of good report. At the beginning of this journey, if I had come this way, I would have looked at every one of them and made notes in a little black notebook. But this was the end and not the beginning. I didn't even know where the little black book was. I had long ceased to consult my guidebook, my economic geography, and being a vain, idle, and weak mortal, and if I hadn't been, I should not have been the man for this job, I said that though we are now in Norwich, we must be in Highgate village and home before the day is out. Oh, blimey. When you consider those 100 miles, those counties, those ancient towns through which we should have to rush, doing nothing but making time, as chauffeurs say, you can see that I was not really completing the journey, but suddenly abandoning it, giving it up as a bad job. The original itinerary I sketched for myself in that first idiotic flush, when you plan things for a self that is not you at all, but somebody 3 times as strong, energetic, conscientious, and determined, there was a hopeful reference to places like Newmarket, Cambridge, Bury St. Edmunds, Ipswich, Colchester. No doubt I could have produced some pretty paragraphs on Newmarket, which is perhaps more like a place conjured out of an old sporting print than in any other England. Even I, who dislike racing and horsey people, may have been enchanted by Newmarket, by the wide green ribbons of the gallops on the heath, the nodding glossy processions of racers, the old-fashioned monkey-like stable hands, and the equestrian clatter and breeziness of the town itself, which does not really belong to this century at all. I've been to Newmarket, it's very nice. A luxury town, if ever there was one. Then Cambridge. I know Cambridge well enough, having spent 3 years there, and many an odd day or two since. A lovely old place, far lovelier than Oxford. But either you are completely and happy at home there, or are always faintly uncomfortable, longing to escape from the King's Parade or the Trumpington Road. I was always faintly uncomfortable, being compelled to feel, and quite rightly too, a bit of a lout and a bit of a mountebank. No, it was too late to bring Cambridge to this book. As for returning the other way and finding Bury St. Edmunds, Ipswich, Colchester, all good bustling market towns that I've seen before and lunched and dined in, it was too late for that too. I would not set foot in Essex, because Essex begins somewhere among back streets in London's eastern suburbs, and some people think it has no mystery. But I know Essex is huge, mysterious county, with God knows what going on in the remote valleys. No Essex for me. I was going home, and by the shortest route. We would make time. At this piece of news, my driver's face lost that mixed look of distrust, contempt, and irony which he always wears when he's not within 3 miles of the High Street in Camden Town. I've seen whole regions of well-advertised loveliness dwindle and blanch before that look. The further we are from High Street Camden Town, the more sardonic it appears. I never see I have never commanded its owner to drive me into Westmoreland or Cumberland out of sheer compassion for those counties. But now, it seems, sense was returning to the world. We were to go no more a-roving and ask silly questions. We were to move steadily at 50-odd miles an hour in the direction of Gamages and the Holborn Empire, without another senseless halt. Real travellers making time, he declared, happily that we should be home for tea. He was wrong. We did not make time. This was to be no journey worth talking about, except as an ordeal, where cars are washed and greased. Time, swiftly conspiring with the elements, showed us a thing or two. The first part of the journey was all right. We went rushing through an empty, sunlit East Anglia, through Thetford, Newmarket and Royston. We reached Baldock and went roaring down the Great North Road. But then the sun went out. Then the surrounding country disappeared. Then the top of the road in front vanished. We had stopped rushing and roaring now. For some time we travelled on 20 yards of road, and it looked as if it was always the same 20 yards. And after that 20 yards we were reduced to 10 and then 5. The cars coming in the opposite direction from London approached us very cautiously in a haze of orange light. There was, as we were told, a fog in London. It seemed to me there was also a fog where we went to, and by this time I didn't know where we were. The 5 yards were reduced to about 2. On the far side of the road soon went, and the near side was uncertain. Sometimes it was there, and sometimes we lost it altogether. Our view was now restricted to a large wobbling green rectangle, on which were painted some words on the subject of furniture removal to all parts of the country. But even between us and this rectangle, the fog was being pumped in all the time. Somebody might have been squeezing a gigantic tube of shaving foam at us. The woolly air was loud with complaints of a long line of cars not allowed to make time. If the green rectangle went fuzzy and its words disappeared, we crawled after it. If it stopped, then we stopped. Sometimes figures mysteriously appeared, even faces, mysterious beings who pointed and shouted before being pulled back into the mountainside of cotton wool. Then the green rectangle disappeared forever, and we had to be content with a smaller greeny-yellow horizon, which had a large battered cabin trunk fastened to it with rope. We watched the cabin trunk. It was all we had. It seemed to be even less certain of itself than the green rectangle, for it stopped and hesitated far more. Once it took a turn and we followed it, only to stop again and find that a figure in brown overalls was outside our window telling us that this was not the road, but the entrance to a garage. And, as there appeared to be hundreds of cars hooting behind, all the traffic of the Great North Road must have been diverted into this garage entrance for the next half hour. Sometimes the fog thinned a trifle, and I remember seeing a vague prickering of red light that, for 1 second, resolved itself into a word service. But service for what or whom I never knew. The yellowing thickness closed over us again. Up to now, I stared until my eyes ached, either at the faint scribble of a curb below or the jelly-like cabin trunk in front. But I was doing no good, whether we stopped or went groaning on into nothing out of nothing. No staring of mine could help. So I lit a pipe and huddled down, dismissed this England that was only blinding vapour for England that I had already seen on my journey. I'm not quite sure what that last sentence means, but there we are. So he's obviously approaching London in the fog. I think that's what we're getting to there. Southampton to Newcastle, Newcastle to Norwich. Memories rose like milk coming to the boil. That's a nice analogy, isn't it? I had seen England. I had seen a lot of Englands. How many? At once, three disentangled themselves from the shifting mass. There was first Old England, the country of cathedrals and minsters, and manor houses and inns, of parsons and squire, guidebook and quaint highways and byways of England. We all know this England, which is its best, which at its best cannot be improved upon the world. That is, a country to lounge about in, for a tourist who can afford to pay a stiff price for a poorish dinner, an inconvenient bedroom and lukewarm water in a small brass jug. 1933, remember? It has few luxuries, but nevertheless it is a luxury country. It has long ceased to earn its living. I am for scrupulously preserving the most enchanting bits of it, such as the cathedrals and the colleges and the Cotswolds, and for letting the rest take its chance. There are people who believe that in some mysterious way we can all return to this old England, though nothing is said about killing off 9/10 of our present population, which would have to be the first step. The same people might consider competing in the race at Brooklands with a horse and trap. The chances are about the same, and the right course of conduct, I reflect, was not, unless you happen to be a professional custodian, to go and brood and dream over these almost heartbreaking prices of natural or architectural loveliness, doing it all at the expense of a lot of poor devils toiling in muck, but have to occasionally peep at them, thus to steel your determination that sooner or later the rest of English life, even where the muck is now, shall have as good quality of those things. Sort of lost myself in that sentence a little bit. Then I decided there is the 19th century England, the industrial England of coal, iron, steel, cotton, wool, railways, of thousands of rows of little houses, all alike, sham Gothic churches, square-faced chapels and town halls, mechanics' institutes, mills, foundries, warehouses, refined watering places, pier pavilions, family and commercial hotels, literary and philosophical societies, back-to-back houses, detached villas with monkey trees, grill rooms, railway stations, slag hips and tips, dock roads, refurbished rooms, doss houses, union or liberal clubs, cindery waste ground, mill chimneys, slums, fried fish shops, public houses with red blinds, Bethels in corrugated iron, good-class draperies and confectioners' shops, a cynical, devastated countryside, sooty, dismal little towns, and still sootier, grim, forest-like cities. This England makes up the larger part of the Midlands and the North, and exists everywhere, but is not being added to, and no life being poured into it. To the more fortunate people, it was not a bad England at all, a very solid and comfortable. A great deal of very good literature has come out of it, though most of that literature never accepted it but looked either backward or forward. It provided a good parade ground for tough, enterprising men who could build their factories in the knowledge that the world was waiting for their products, and who also knew that once they had accumulated a tiny fortune, they could slip out of this mucky England of their making into the older, charming one, where the children, well-schooled, groomed and finished, were almost indistinguishable in their various uniforms, pink hunting coats to white ties and shiny pumps, from the old inhabitants, the land-owning aristocrats. But first you had to be tough. I reminded myself how more than once I had thought of that the Victorians liked to weep over their novels and plays, not because they were any more sensitive or softer than we are, but because they were much tougher and further removed from emotion, so that they needed good strong doses of pathos to move them at all. The less fortunate classes were very unlucky indeed in England. The less fortunate classes were very unlucky indeed in that England. They had some sort of security, which is more than many of them have now, but it was a security of monstrously long hours of work, miserable wages, and surroundings in which they lived like black beetles at the back of a disused kitchen stove. Many of their descendants are still living in those surroundings, but few people now have the impudence to tell them to be resigned and even thankful there, to toil in humble deliberance before their Maker and for his chosen children, the debenture holders. Whether they were better off in this England than the one before, the pre-industrial one, is a question that I admit I could not answer. They all rushed into the towns and the mills as soon as they could, as we know, which suggests that the dear old quaint England they were escaping from could not have been very satisfying. You do not hurry out of Arcadia to work in a factory 12 hours a day for about 18 pence. Moreover, why did the population increase so rapidly after the Industrial Revolution? What was it about merry England that kept the numbers down? One thing I told myself I was certain of, and it was this, that whether the people were better or worse off in this 19th century England, it had done more harm than good to the real enduring England. It had found a green and pleasant land and left a wilderness of dirty bricks. It had blackened fields, poisoned rivers, ravaged the earth, and sown filth and ugliness with a lavish hand. You cannot make omelettes without breaking eggs, and you cannot become rich by selling the world your coal and iron and cotton goods and chemicals without some dirt and disorder. So much is admitted, but there are far too many eggshells and too few omelettes about this 19th century England. What you see looks like debauchery of cynical greed. As I thought of some of the places I'd seen, Wolverhampton, St. Helens and Bolton, Gateshead and Jarrow and Shotton, I remembered a book that I had just read, in which we are told to return as soon as possible to the sturdy Victorian individualism. But for my part, I felt like calling back a few of these sturdy individualists simply to rub their noses in the nasty mess they had made. Who gave them leave to turn this island into an ash pit? They may or may not have left us their money, but they have certainly left us their muck. If every penny of that money had been spent on England herself, the balance would still be miles on the wrong side. It is as if the country had devoted 100 years of its life to keeping gigantic sooty pigs, and the people who were choked by the reek of these sties did not get the bacon. The more I thought about it, the more this period of England's industrial supremacy began to look like a gigantic dirty trick. At one end of this commercial greatness were a lot of half-starved, bleary-eyed children crawling about among machinery, and at the other end were the traders getting natives boozed up with bad gin. Cynical greed. Damn you, I'm all right. Damn you, I'm all right. You can see that much written in the black letters across half England. Had I not just spent days moving glumly in the shadow of their downstrokes? The third England belonged far more to the age itself than this peculiar island. America, I suppose, was its real birthplace. This is the England of arterial and bypass roads, of filling stations and factories that look like exhibition buildings, of giant cinemas and dance halls and cafes, bungalows with tiny garages, cocktail bars, Woolworths, motor coaches, wireless, hiking, factory girls looking like actresses, greyhound racing and dirt tracks, swimming pools, and everything given away for cigarette coupons. If the fog had lifted, I knew that I should never have seen this England all round me in that northern entrance to London, where the smooth, wide road passes between miles of semi-detached bungalows, with all their little garages, their wireless sets, their periodicals about film stars, their swimming costumes and tennis rackets and dancing shoes. The fog did not lift for an instant, however. The fog did not lift for an instant, however. Read that again wrong. The fog did not lift for an instant. However, we crawled, stopped, crawled again, and I had ample time to consider carefully this newest England from my richly confused memory of it. Care is necessary too, for you can easily approve or disapprove of it too hastily. It is, of course, essentially democratic. After a social revolution, there would, with any luck, be more or less of it. You need money in this England, but you do not need much money. It is a large-scale, mass-production job with cut prices. You could almost accept Woolworths as a symbol. Its cheapness is both its strength and its weakness. It is its strength because, being cheap, it's accessible. It nearly achieves the famous equality of opportunity. In this England, for the first time in history, Jack and Jill are nearly as good as their masters and mistresses. They may have always been as good in their own way, but now they are nearly as good in the same way. Jack, like his master, is rapidly transported to some place or other. Jack, like his master, is rapidly transported to some place or rather mechanical amusement. Jill beautifies herself exactly as her mistress does. It is an England at last, without privilege. Years and years ago, the democratic and enterprising Blackpool, by declaring that you were all as good as one another so long as you had the necessary sixpence, began all this. Modern England is rapidly blackpooling itself. Notice how the very modern things, like the films and the wireless and the sixpenny stores, are absolutely democratic, making no distinction whatever between their patrons. If you are in a position to accept what they give, and very few people are not in that position, then you get neither more or less than what somebody else gets. Just as in the popular restaurants, there are no special helpings for favoured patrons, but mathematical portions for everybody. There is almost every luxury in this world except the luxury of power or the luxury of privacy. The young people of this New England do not play chorus in an opera in which their social superiors are their principals. They do not live vicariously, enjoy life second hand by telling one another what wonderful time the young Earl is having and how beautiful Lady Mary looked in her court dress. They can get on with their own lives. They must have heroes and heroines that they choose for themselves from the ranks of film stars and sportsmen and the like. This may not seem important, but nevertheless it is quite new in English life, where formerly, as we may see from memoirs and old novels, people lived in an elaborate network of relations up and down the social scale, despising and pitying their inferiors, admiring or hating their superiors. You see this still in the country and small towns, but not in this New England, which is as near to a class of society as we have got yet. Unfortunately, it is a bit too cheap. That is, it is also cheap in the other sense of the term. Too much of it is simply a trumpery imitation of something not very good, even in the original. There is about it a rather depressing monotony. Too much of this life is being stamped on from outside, probably by astute financial gentlemen backed by the press and their publicity services. You feel that too many of the people in this New England are doing not what they like, but what they've been told they would like. Here is the American influence at work. When I was a boy in Yorkshire, the men there who used to meet and sing part songs in the upper rooms of the taverns, they used to call themselves glee unions, were not being humbugged by any elaborate publicity scheme on part of either music publishers or brewers, were not falling in with any general movement or fashion. They were singing glees over their beer because they liked to sing glees over their beer. It was their own idea of the way of spending an evening. They didn't care tuppence whether it was anybody else's idea or not. They drank and yarned and roared away happily in the spontaneous expression of themselves. I do not feel that any of the activities of this New England have that same spontaneity. Even that push towards the open, which we have now decided to call hiking, has something regimented about it. Most of the work, as we've already seen, is rapidly becoming standardised in this New England, and its leisure is being handed over to standardisation too. It is a cleaner, tidier, healthier, saner world than that of the 19th century industrialism. The difference between the two Englands is well expressed by the difference between a typical 19th century factory, a huge dark brick box, and a modern factory, all glass and white tiles and chromium plate. If you remember the old factories at closing time, go and see the working people. If you remember the old factories at closing time, go and see the work people coming out of the new factories. The change is startling. Nevertheless, I cannot rid myself of the suspicion that the old brick boxes had more solid lumps of character inside them than the new places have. Is it possible that, being a literary man, I attach too much importance to character, preferring a dirty, diseased eccentric to a lean, healthy, but rather dull citizen? Unconsciously, I may see people as so much possible raw material for novels and plays. England of the 18th and 19th centuries were a wonderful, rich country for a novelist, because it was full of odd characters, like the old Russia. The new Russia, on the other hand, seems to be giving us novelists of a lot of trouble. I must guard against this, the bias of my trade. You cannot estimate the life of a people by the wealth of dramatic material it offers you. We all know that you can make a novel and a play out of an unhappy marriage, whereas a happy marriage is a tedious theme. Dickens protested violently against the bad conditions of his time, but if he had been born into a neat, clean world, where little boys were never sent to work in blacking factories, where there were no overworked, half-starved clerks crouching like gnomes in gloomy little offices, he would not have been the grandly fantastic Dickens we know. Possibly we authors are busy cutting the ground from under our feet, but an ignoble a not ignoble occupation. After all, the world does not simply exist for creative writers who happen to like strong effects. It is better that people should be leading decent, useful, contented lives, that they should be asking to be immortalised, than they should be asking to be immortalised in their misery. But even after making an allowance for this professional bias, I cannot help feeling that this New England is lacking in character, in zest, gusto, flavour, bite, drive, originality, and that this is a serious weakness. Monotonous but easy work and a liberal supply of cheap luxuries might between them create a set of people entirely without ambition or any real desire to think and act for themselves, the perfect subjects for an iron autocracy. Then I remember the younger folk here and there, all products of this newest England, and I saw that there is a section of people who have its strength but are untouched by its weakness. I met them all over the country, not many at a time, for there were not enough of them to make a crowd in any one place. There would have been a great many more if the finest members of my own generation had not been slaughtered in the war. Most of these people, of course, are younger. They're not prigs, though being young and earnest they are inclined at times to be a shade too solemn. They are not saving their souls or going about doing good. They have a social conscience. Their imagination is not blunted. They know that we are interdependent and that and that bluffing and cheating are useless. There are several of them, without names in this book. I usually found them doing a very pleasant job of work for the benefit of people worse off than themselves. They are good citizens, and yet we have no city worthy of them. Perhaps they are building it themselves now. These people are very nice to me, but I didn't always like meeting them. It's not pleasant suddenly seeing yourself as an impatient, weak, greedy egotist. Here, then, are the three Englands I've seen, the old and the 19th century and the new. And as I look back on my journey, I saw how these three were variously and most fascinatingly mingled in every part of the country I had visited. It would be possible, though not easy, to make a coloured map of them. There was one already in my mind, bewilderingly coloured and crowded with living people. It made me feel dizzy. I returned to a fog-bound car, which was now crawling and halting in a world of sepia vapour, in which lost cars, making no time at all, hooted their despair. There was nothing I could do. We have not far to go. I thought that was terrific. I thought that resume of the three Englands that he described was fascinating. What did you think? Did you think that was fascinating? Were you the old England that he says people want to often turn the clock back and go back to, which is something that I often am accused of. And then the industrialised England of the dingy, mucky, ash pit, blackened people, working like beetles, slaving away for a pittance, living in muck. That was fascinating. And then the new, the where it's all cleaned up, and I guess we're still in that process, aren't we? The New England, where people are doing everything standardised. And I think that's so true. That 80, 90 years ago, don't you think that's so true? Everything was becoming very much standardised, and we're sort of still there. And the sense of the corporations coming in, and people working with the that embryonic process of the way that the corporations entrap you into becoming ants working in a larger corporation, chucking out standardized this that we're all happy with. And then his look back to the characters, which from a creative and from a literary point of view was fascinating. And it is interesting. I've got a book somewhere. It may reminded me of a book I've got called I can't remember. It's about eccentrics, English eccentrics through the years. And some of the eccentrics, the things that they used to do, the eccentricity of these people and the quirky lives that they lived are so extreme. One person who I remember only wanted to be immersed in water all the time, and he had great baths and things. Another one who wanted to live underground all the time and had tunnels and things, windowless rooms, and in his big country pile. And of course, only the rich who had the money could act out these fleets of fantasy. And I suppose they weren't so. They're isolated in their world that these flights of fantasy became their world and became life itself. And so you see all these eccentrics and the things that they could do because they had so much money, and money from birth, I suppose, because they hadn't had to work for it, and became rather eccentric and would often lose their money and things like that. And then as you get into the industrialized world, people are more connected and see more of what the world actually is, I suppose, and the eccentricity is beaten out of people. And now, everybody's an individual, and everybody's looking for an individual way of presenting themselves on Instagram, or they're trying to conform and follow the fashion of some pop star or influencer. That's fascinating. I've often seen parallels with today in his writings, e.g. the cheap shops selling tat from the Far East. Absolutely. And it's 90 years, little has changed. Little has changed, although here we are in a crisis with China, and maybe we will stop. Maybe it's doubtful, isn't it? It's doubtful that we're going to go back. It's doubtful that we're going to stop running for the bottom, for the cheapest, the bottom line. We've all got used to having cheap food, cheap this, cheap that, and I can't really imagine people wanting to go back and commissioning, as he said earlier in the book, commissioning a skilled craftsman who could make a desk with their hands that may cost them £1,000 instead of £100 or 60 quid or whatever it is down the road at MFI, or I don't think MFI is still going now, showing my age there, or down at the Range or somewhere, or IKEA or some such naff old outfit like that. Personally, and we all want that. We're all being sold a style or a way of life. We're all keeping up with the Joneses, and more so than ever. For eccentrics, people should watch Viv Stanshall's One Man Week, available on YouTube. Oh, right. Oh, okay. Englishness is a state of mind, an attitude that is slowly being lost. Yes, I suppose yes, I suppose that is true. An attitude of mind. Only the very rich. Yes, well, only the very rich. Yes, I mean, when you go back into the ancient, and you go back, 2 or 3 centuries, it is amazing how apparently rich they were. Some of them, obviously, the gulf probably hasn't changed. I would imagine there's still probably plenty of rich, but there's probably a hell of a lot more not quite so rich. I don't know. We could finish this book now, or we could wait until tomorrow. I have nothing to replace it as yet. What I thought we could do is I thought I could bring, instead of launching into another book, plus the fact we don't really know how long this lockdown's going on. We know it's going on for after this week, another 2 weeks at least. And once the lockdown is finished, I probably won't have the time to do these readings, or at least I'll want to be going places. And so this would be a moment where I'm actually in the car travelling. But what I thought for the next few days, at least, if I'm trying to find something perfect to read, it would be to bring different readings, sort of sections from different books, and bring those to you, because I've got lots of curious books and books. So then you could read a bit from things like Robin Page's The Last Village, whatever it was called, The Decline of an English Village, and things like that. That's what I thought of doing. But we are 12 minutes past. We could probably knock this off in 10 minutes. What do you think? Give it a whirl? My hands and feet were cold, and I thought longingly of the cup of tea that I ought to have been enjoying at home by this time, and would have been enjoying at home if the Thames Valley and the London smoke had not been up to their old tricks. We were all very clever people nowadays, I said to myself, but we still allowed the fog to smother us and the flu to lay us out. We were brilliant, I decided, only in patches. Our civilization was rather like a stock comic figure of the professor who knows all about electrons but doesn't know how to boil an egg or tie his bootlaces. Our knowledge begins anywhere but at home. We would understand anything as long as it didn't immediately concern us. Aldebaran or Beetlejuice, I told myself, stood a better chance with us than the north of England. that brought me sharply back to the England of the dole. This word dole has two meanings. It means a charitable distribution, especially a rather niggardly one. It also means, or did mean in its archaic use, a man's lot or destiny. We have contrived most artfully to combine these two meanings. As I look back on it, the England of the dole did not seem to me a pleasant place. We could not be proud of its creation. We could not really afford to be complacent about it, although we often are. It is a poor shuffling job, and one of our worst compromises. When I began to ask myself exactly what was wrong with it, faces and voices from that unhappy world returned to my memory. I saw again the older men who, though they knew they were idle and useless through no fault of their own, felt defeated and somewhat tainted. Their self-respect was shedding away. Their very manhood was going. Even in England, which is no South Sea island, there are places where a man feels he can do nothing cheerfully, where gay idling is not impossible. But the ironist in charge of our affairs has seen to it that the maximum of unemployment shall be in those very districts that have a... The ironist in charge of our affairs has seen to it that the maximum of unemployment shall be in those districts that have a tradition of hard work and of very little else. Life in the dole in South Devon, let's say, may be bad enough, but life on the dole on Tyneside is a great deal worse. I saw those old workless men as a series of personal tragedies. The young men who have grown up in the shadow of the labour exchange, and not so the young men who have grown up in the shadow of the labour exchange are not so much personal tragedies, I decided, as collectively a national tragedy. I do not believe that people are entirely at the mercy of their environment. Exceptional persons not only refuse to be moulded by their environment, but actually set about changing the environments themselves. But they have to be exceptional. Average people are largely products of a temporary set of conditions. The atmosphere in which these young unemployed men have grown up is poisoned. It is that of a workday world that has no work, of a money-ridden world that has lost its money. They are playboys who cannot really play. Nobody says to them, look here, you have arrived at manhood in a time so bewildering that we do not know where we are. The old rules aren't working. We haven't made any new ones yet. There's a dreadful lag between man, the inventor, and the producer, and man, the organizer and distributor. We haven't caught up with the machines yet. It's all a transition. The world is under new management. The present muddle has put you fellows out, and at the moment you can't settle down to work as your father and grandfather did at your age. Perhaps you never will. Perhaps we're going to change all the ideas about work. Meanwhile, get on with your lives. There's plenty to do. The town is live. The town you live in, rather, is a disgrace to any civilised community. Clean up the miserable hole. And remember, you're not waifs and strays and corner boys. You're citizens of a new world. Keep yourselves in good shape. Learn something worth learning. This is your chance. We do not say that. But if we do not mean that, what do we mean? Are we really saying, here, you nuisances, take this. It isn't much. It's just enough to keep you alive. A little more or less, and you'd start kicking. With this, you'll be alive but not kicking. And now get out and let's forget about you. I asked myself what this game was that we were playing. It cannot be every man for himself. It cannot be every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. It cannot be that, or we should not have employment and health insurance and old age pensions and the rest. But on the other hand, on the one hand, and on the other hand, I should not be paying more than a third of my income away in taxes. These suggest a real corporate life, but it cannot be very real, or we should all be showing, roughly, the same kind of face. I remember then how, just after the armistice, I had been sent to look after some German prisoners of war. They had a certain look, these prisoners of war, most of whom had been captured 2 or 3 years before. It was a strained, greyish, faintly decomposed look. I didn't expect to see that kind of face again for a long time, but I was wrong. I had seen a lot of those faces on this journey. They belonged to unemployed men. I reminded myself firmly that I was no economist, that I had not that sort of mind, moving easily among abstractors. My childhood literary mind always fastens upon concrete details. Thus, when the newspapers tell me that there is yet another financial crash and that gold is being rushed from one country to another, and I see photographs of excited city men jostling and scrambling, and of bank porters and sailors carrying boxes of bullion, I always feel that some idiotic game is going on, and that it is as preposterous that the welfare of millions of real people should depend on the fortunes of this game, as it would be for our happiness to be hung upon the stock exchange golfing tournament. This spectacle of the sailors carrying gold seems to me to belong to a pantomime of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and not to anything more serious. A literary fellow, another simpleton, once told me of his idea for a film which would show men searching for gold in hellish deserts among icy peaks, making feverish discoveries, then toiling away, mining the precious stuff, until at last, after the most colossal sequences of adventure and slavery, you would see the bars of metal carefully being taken down into the vaults of the banks, underground once more. That seemed to me, I remember, an excellent idea, in which I took a possible childish delight. That's the kind of mind I have, not quite fully adult. On the rare occasions when really grown-up persons, such as economists and bankers and city men, condescend to mention their interests to me, I show a complete lack of comprehension and seriousness that brings smiles to those solemn faces. So I told myself, as I stared at the fog, that even in trying to think about these things, I was foolishly floundering out of my depth. But I risked it. Perhaps the enveloping fog gave me courage. I thought then how this city, which is always referred to with such tremendous respect, which is treated as if it were the very beating red heart of England, must have got its money from somewhere, that it could not have conjured the gold out of Threadneedle Street, and that a great deal of this money must have poured into it at one time, and a good long time too, from that part of the England which is much dearer to me than the city, namely the industrial north. For generations this blackened north toiled and moiled so that England should be rich and the city of London a great power in the world. But now this north is half derelict, and its people, living on in queer, ugly places, are shabby, bewildered, unhappy. And I told myself that I would prefer, if somebody must be miserable, to see the people in the city all shabby, bewildered and unhappy. I was prejudiced, of course, simply because I belong to the north myself, and perhaps, too, I like people who make things better than I like people who only deal in money. And then again I reflected it's much pleasanter either working or idling in the city, a charming old place, than it is in Bolton or Jarrow or Middlesbrough, so that the people here could stand a little more worry. Perhaps I would not have dragged the city into this meditation at all if I had not been told every time the nation made an important move that went on the gold standard or went off it, that the city had ordered it. The city, then, I thought, must accept the responsibility. Either it's bossing us about, or it isn't. If it isn't, then it must take the blame, if there is any blame to be taken. And there, seemed to me a great deal of blame to be taken. What had the city done for this old ally, the industrial North? It seemed to have done what the black-moustached, glossy gentleman in the old melodramas always did to the innocent village maiden. It was all very puzzling. Was Jarrow still in England or not? Had we exiled Lancashire and the north-east coast? Were we no longer on speaking terms with cotton weavers and miners and platers and riveters? Why had nothing been done about the decaying towns and their workless people? Was everything waiting for a miracle to happen? I knew that doles had been given out, means tests applied, training places opened, stocks and shirts and old books distributed by the Personal Service League and the like. But I was not thinking of feeble gestures of that kind, of the sort of charity you might extend to a drunken old ruffian begging at the back door. I meant something constructive and creative. If Germans had been threatening these towns instead of want, disease and hopelessness and misery, something would have been done quick enough. Yet Jarrow, and how true that was since 7 years later, yet Jarrow and Hebburn look much worse to me than some of the French towns I saw at the end of the war, towns that had been occupied by the enemy for 4 years. Why has there been no plan for these areas, these people? The dole is no part of that plan. It is merely declaration of intellectual bankruptcy. You only have to spend a morning in the dole country to see that it is all wrong. Nobody is getting any substantial benefit, any reasonable satisfaction out of it. Nothing is encouraged by it except a shambling, dull-eyed, poor imitation of life. The labour exchanges stink of defeated humanity. The whole thing is unworthy of the great country that in its time has given the world some nobly creative ideas. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves. Anybody who imagines that this is a time for self-congratulation has never poked his nose outside Westminster, the City, and Fleet Street. And I concluded he has not used his eyes and ears much, even in Westminster and Fleet Street. Oh my, there are so little of it left. But we will leave that for tomorrow. We will leave that for tomorrow. The last couple of pages. I'm going to leave that till tomorrow, and then we can have a chat about it. What do you think? I think so, because my eyes are dancing a bit. But that was fantastic. That's fantastic. Very strong language there, Richard, in floral format. Very true. They are now finding most of the money for small businesses went to large corporations. Hi from Simon. Sorry, late today. I've got a cold, not COVID. Weather grey and cold in Madrid, but hearts are just around the corner. But the heat, just trying to focus. Americans are easily fooled. You have been watching. Have you been watching the Masters report? I've not heard of that. There is a long-standing feeling that the North has been beleaguered. I can't. Why the letters? The screen is just. Having been looking this close, my eyes are just taking. Better used or forgotten. Betrayed. Sorry, there's no Y. That's why. Betrayed or forgotten by the South. Yes, I'm sure that those memories linger on. Absolutely. It has been like that for much of the nation's history. That's interesting. This is no normal time of the year. Gets warm soon. I think that's fascinating. Oh, wish my eyes would. I've only got the one eye, you see. So the one eye is. I say eyes. The one is fake. One is not a proper eye at all. It's coming back. It's coming back. Isn't that what he's doing, MDM? Oh, MDM, Mark Donny McLeod. Yeah. Fascinating. Anyway, we've only got this tiny little bit to go. This is really, really exciting. to get to the end. That's a fascinating and interesting, and I will mull on that, what he was talking about, particularly the original, those three elements of England that he's described. And here we are 90 years on, trying to work out who we are. We're always trying to work out who we are and what we're going. And we've seen some amazing and interesting, curious changes, haven't we, in the world and our path in it. And I think there's been a whole load of, in recent years, this whole load of making out that we were nothing, that we were meaningless, that as a nation we're nothing, and that globalization is everything, and that people from any part of the world other than in England have been the contributor to our success and made us good. And I absolutely disagree that that's true. Obviously, people coming in from different parts of the world have contributed and do continue to contribute, but it isn't purely down to them. There's certain narratives that are being put out at the moment to say that that we were rubbish, the empire was rubbish, and it was all bad, and everything is bad, is just so wrong. Richard, how do we buy your merch? If you took the H off that, would that be my Merc? You can buy my Merc. I haven't got a Merc, actually. I've got an old Peugeot. Merchandise, do you mean? Yes, I do mugs. I think on the baldexplorer.com website, you can buy mugs and T-shirts. There's a link to the so-called shop. The North has been basically a shed for making things more than the habitat of the many who make those things. As soon as these tools are no longer required, they're left to rot. It is a very, I think you're right. The world would be a much better place without the evils of globalization, says Barry. And I do agree. I do think that we should be more self-sufficient. We've all become very, not dependent. Well, I suppose we are dependent. Trying to work out one's philosophy in this world is actually quite difficult, because I think it's very easy to grasp broad ideas and go, broadly speaking, this is where I feel I am. And then you start to examine that broad idea and go, well, obviously, it's like, so broadly, I would say probably that I'm a traditionalist, and I do like all the rose-tinted visions of the past, the small houses, plots of land, growing your own stuff, a more cleaner environment, less people who share your values, people who share your culture, people who you get on with, and that you wouldn't have to lock the house, all this sort of old England stuff. But of course, you can't turn the clock back, and there's too many people to let everybody have an acre of land, or however many acres it was deemed that you needed to survive, or to have a communal land that you worked in, like in the old open fields. We can't go back there. But then at the same time as all of that, the convenience of nipping over to the supermarket and grabbing something like some milk when you just need it because you want to do something else other than go and milk the cow now. And all this technology that we have, this ability to communicate and to do this sort of stuff, and say the ability to be able to sit here and say all of this stuff is terrible, and yet use all of this stuff in a creative and a genius way, of course, is an oxymoron, isn't it? And we are where we are. We can't go back. But I would agree that, in principle, to me, I think globalization is not a great thing. I think losing our manufacturing here, there are people who want to make things. And I also think that thing about, he says, the business about giving people a skill that they're proud of, that they can make something with their hands. Not everybody wants this, but I think many people like that. Women love making things. They may be softer things generally, and I'm just generalizing here, you know, like knitting or craft and things like that, painting and creative stuff, and men too. And generally, again, these are broad strokes, and I'm not trying to be sexist, but of course it can be perceived to be sexist. Men like the harder stuff, generally, and they tinker with cars and vehicles and change things, and they like mechanics and trains and all that. And of course there is women like it too, but not in the same numbers. Clearly that's true, isn't it? And I think give people skills, and they feel valued. And I think being valued is something that is very important in life, personally. Ramibu, wow, you did that fast, KBH. Oh, I just bought a mug. Oh, see, sorry. I thought kilobytes per second there. I thought suddenly the stream had gone incredibly fast, but oh yes. No matter the era, the garden wasn't always rosy. Exactly. I mean, that's true. It is very true. And it's very easy to look back and think everything was lovely in the old days. And of course it wasn't. And one has to be very careful about that. Audrey says, Made in England is now something remarkable. Well, I would like to see Made in England become less remarkable, but important. I would like to see it. I would like to see us self-sufficient. That's what I would like. I would like to see more self-sufficiency, and I would like to see more local produce. And I would, yeah. I mean, for me, my adult journey and when I call adult journey, I suppose from my late 30s, 40s to now and beyond, is trying to work out what it is I actually want my life to be. I don't know. Change is happening so rapidly that it's trying to, you think you know where you are in life, and you think you've worked it all out, and suddenly, oh, there's all this new innovative, and we're doing this and we're doing that, and it's like you're being constantly pushed along all the time, and I resist a bit of that. Look at the top people who push and advance globalism, and it becomes obvious it's not a positive thing for the world. You don't ever shut up, Barry. I don't think you should shut up. You have an opinion, and your opinion is as valid as somebody who thinks the globalization is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And people should be the biggest thing, not the biggest thing, but certainly a very important thing, is that we can all say what we believe in and be listened to and talk about it without heated responses, and just agree to disagree when we have to and get on. I mean, we should all get on. That's how I think about it. And generally, I'm much more on your side that globalization is not a good thing. That said, though, I do like a chili con carne, and I do like some spices coming in. I wouldn't want to live on just fish and chips or cottage pie. But then I'm quite happy to make my own chili con carne. I don't need somebody from Chile. Not that it is from Chile, but I don't need somebody from another country to make it for me. I could make it for myself. And actually, it would be lovely, in this climate, and this May, probably grow my own chilies. There is a movement to dismiss things and put blame for things that happened over 100 years ago that is not relevant now, but things were wrong for all but the few. Let me just redigest that. There's a movement to dismiss things and put the blame on things that happened 100 years ago that is not relevant now, but things were wrong for all the few. I think I agree with what you're saying, trying to work what that means. I find the older I get, the more nostalgia I become. I think that's just true of everybody, isn't it? What always surprises me, and I must stop this. I must stop because I need to go and make a video. But what always surprises me is we say this phrase, "Oh, in my day," and it sort of denotes a time in our younger years. In my day, I used to do this, and in my day, well, I'm still alive. It's still my day, It is still my day. And so I try and resist that. Oh, in my day, I used to juggle and unicycle and fiery. That's what I used to do. But it's still my day. In my day, I used to make live broadcasts. When I say globalism, I do not mean trading with other countries, and people should love abroad, but we should put ourselves first. All countries should do that. Focus more on local businesses. Yes, and that's what I would totally agree with. I think there's nothing wrong with trading with other countries because that makes them rich, and they learn stuff about one country, and we learn stuff about that. But for me, the globalism is that where everybody is just the same. We're all the same. We all become this. It's like taking plasticine of different colours, and it's lovely looking at a red piece of plasticine or a green piece of plasticine, and whatever that culture is of the plasticine world. It's like, yes, that's fantastic. It's lovely to have a look at it. But if you take all those bits of plasticine and just mould them into one sort of dull, monotonous colour, and everybody is of the same, the world is a beautiful place. But if you just make the world into wherever you are is identical, which is what I find with the chain stores, the big chain stores, not the ones that have a couple of ironmongers in 2 or 3 towns locally, I think that's absolutely great. And after you've got about 5 stores, you probably don't need any more, do you? But when you've got coffee shops on a corner of a street opposite the same brand of coffee shop on the other, and you can get that same coffee or that same hamburger in one country right across the world, and it's identical, to me that's wrong. That's wrong. I want if you're going to have if you want to have a hamburger in one country and a hamburger in another country, I want them to taste bloody different. I'm not going to travel 3,000 miles to have a hamburger that tastes absolutely identical. What's the point? Not that I like hamburgers from those chains anyway. I refuse to buy anything from chains generally. I mean, I have to go to the supermarket because there's no choice. Yes, in my day should be in my youth. Exactly. That's what I think. I think Mark Donny McLeod is talking about ethnomasochism. We are beating our breasts for things which are not reprehensible anyway. UK Empire planted democracy in America, New Zealand, Australia. Exactly. I mean, we should be. I think that we should be proud of the empire. We did things terribly wrong in the age that it was, thinking things were right, and we were greedy, and we kind of knew things were wrong and what have you. But we did what we did, and what we did, we can make no apology now. We did it. It's done. We can't change it. But the upsides of what we did in the empire is putting in democracy and the rule of law and things like that. It has been an immense benefit to the world. We were homogenized now. Yeah, homogenized is the word. I don't like being homogenized. Humans are tribal by nature. Groups always flock together. Trying to mishmash them will never work. I agree. I mean, look, you only have to look at how unintegrated people are when they come. The fact that the world has so many different cultures is what makes the world great. Absolutely. Starbucks always put every shop on a corner. They do, and they seem to be putting them on the opposite corner as well. Globalization and large corporations. Anyway, we could talk about this forever, but we mustn't. We mustn't because we're not really achieving anything. I could have finished the book in this time. Oh, well, tomorrow we will do that. And then I will think about something else to read. Morning, Richard. I'm seeing if I can listen to you whilst working. I'm setting reports up on viral variants similar to C19. I'll PM you later. Please do, Ernie. Please do. Divide and rule. Yeah. I would love each country to be self-sufficient on their own, depend on their own skills to build what they need to do. Yeah, absolutely. But still, we have to trade because we should be able to experience each other's cultures, like you said, with spices and foods, etc., etc. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming along. Sorry about the sort of putting the world to rights bit, but I mean, that's what debate is all about, and that's what this book seems to have elicited, certainly in me. Fascinating book for its time, and a snapshot of one person's opinion. We'll finish it off tomorrow, and then we'll work out where we go from here. Thank you very much. Enjoy the day. I will catch up with you later. No doubt I shall have a sneak preview of a little bit of Will Hay to keep me amused and jolly. That was in the 1930s. That must have been doing a great deal, actually, when you think about it. Comedians and comedies in there to keep people amused. It's what you need. Till next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.